Member from Mississauga-Streetsville.
Speaker, it doesn't seem like 14 years ago that I was in my campaign for my first successful election, and at the time, everybody knew that the last PC Ontario budget was in deficit, despite the fact that they claimed that it was in surplus. And I remember asking our critic, Jerry Phillips, at the time, and I said, Jerry, you know, clearly we know that this thing is a deficit. How much do you think it is? And he said, well, it's hard to say. You know, it might be 1 or it might be 2. It could even be as high as $3 billion. And after the election, but before the government was sworn in, the Premier-elect, Dalton McGuinty, said, let's find out how much this is, and commissioned a report by the former Auditor General, Eric Peters, and he said, when we form government, let's just know how deep in the hole that we're starting from. And this goes to the credibility of this Opposition Day motion. So it was in mid-October, it was a day or two before the government was sworn in, and we were upstairs on the 3rd floor in our office. And after the media had taken their photos, they just shooed everybody out, and he said, okay, the report's going to be released this afternoon, and here's the number. It's $5.6 billion in deficit. And you could just feel everybody's sucking in their breath and going, oh my God, like we knew it was bad, but we didn't know it was that bad. And this is the party that has proposed an Opposition Day motion to admonish this government that built Ontario about deficits. Please. In their 8 years in office, the Progressive Conservatives managed to increase Ontario's provincial debt by 53%. Not during a time of economic contraction, not during a recession, but during one of the greatest economic expansions in North American history, they brought debt up by 53%. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has begun the response to this Opposition Day motion. As a motion, it is an assertion of such monumental stupidity and willful ideological blindness that there's plenty of room to poke holes in it. The PC party asserts that Ontario should not have borrowed the money that it did to get through the greatest recession since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And I was there when the discussions took place. I was there as we watched the American and the European economies implode, and yet the Canadian fundamentals were solid. It was a recession that didn't start here and wouldn't end here, but one that nonetheless, as Ontarians, we had to cope with. As the Minister of Finance has shown, and as other speakers will show, the PC party would have deliberately flushed away the lives of perhaps 1 million Ontario families, driven away the auto industry, and kept Ontario in recession for an extra 3 years in pursuit of the only economic policy the PC party has ever had, and that policy is austerity. So let's look at the PC party's economic policy and its cornerstone of austerity. During the recession, the Eurozone countries, the United Kingdom and the Baltic states experimented in the way the PC party suggests to find out that if it is possible for an economically stagnant country to cut its way to prosperity. And that policy is called austerity.
Bush tried it too.
And as my colleague points out, in the United States, the administration of then-President George W. Bush tried it as well. Austerity, in economic terms, means the deliberate deflation of domestic wages and prices through cuts to public spending. If you listen to austerity's apologists, in other words, the PCs, they seek to reduce a state's debts and deficits. Conservatives believe austerity increases economic competitiveness and builds business confidence.
Wrong.
Conservatives always believe that slashing spending promotes investment outside government. Let's blow that assertion apart. The effects of austerity are felt hardest in the places where government spending is needed most, and under Conservative governments, cut deepest. Low and moderate income families depend far more on the very government programs than the money that Ontario borrowed in the last decade than do the wealthy. As well, low and moderate income households have little in the way of savings to help them through an economic downturn. So who exactly does the policy of austerity penalize the most? low and moderate income households. They don't care about them. Trying to get the lower end of the income distribution to pay the price of austerity by cutting public spending reflects both the mean-spirited nature of Conservative economic policies and is mathematically impossible.
Right on.
Those Ontarians who can pay taxes won't, while those Ontarians who can't pay taxes will be asked to pay more. Secondly, Speaker, everybody cannot cut their way to a balanced budget and a growing economy at the same time. If businesses are not spending, and governments at all levels are not spending, then what income or savings are there for anyone who needs a job or who has to pay bills or carry a mortgage? This is the part that Conservatives have always got backwards. Finally, the assumption that slashing government spending boosts investor confidence has never stood up to scrutiny. The International Monetary Fund warned in July of 2012 that simultaneous cuts to state spending across interlinked economies during a recession when interest rates were already low would inevitably damage the prospects for growth. And that warning came on top of the already ample evidence that every single country that had embraced austerity had significantly more debt than it did when it started. Ontario, on the other hand, which wisely borrowed money at interest rates of nearly zero, emerged from the recession with renewed infrastructure, with its auto industry intact and profitable, and with entire new sectors of the economy creating jobs and growth, and did it fully 3 years ahead of the United States and Europe, all of which followed the PC Party's austerity plan and did not borrow money. Where would you rather be? I'd rather be in Ontario. As a result, Speaker, Ontario's budget is back in balance. Ontario will be running a budget surplus, and the province can now reduce its debt even as it continues to build the Ontario economy. During their last sorry 8 years in government, the Ontario PC Party slashed spending while the economy was growing, disinvested in Ontario, did not build or renew infrastructure, and increased Ontario's long-term debt by 53% with policies that have failed everywhere and every time that they have been tried. These are the same failed ideas they propose to bring back to Ontario were they ever to form government.
Downloaded to the municipalities.
By contrast, since 2003, Ontario Liberals borrowed wisely at interest rates of nearly zero, financed the debt over the lifetime of its new and renewed assets, invested in Ontario, and sharply grew Ontario's gross domestic product to nearly $800 billion today. Speaker, this province is well on its way to being a North American powerhouse of $1 trillion economy.
Wow.
As a percentage of what the province earns, our debt load, or net debt to GDP ratio, is lower today than it was on the last day of the last PC government. Ontario is not only better off, it can easily afford its debt. While Ontario's net debt to GDP ratio is low by global standards, it is also falling and has been falling since the bottom of the recession. So in global terms, what does this mean? Well, let's look at another few examples. Ontario's net debt to GDP ratio is 39%. In Quebec and British Columbia, it's 42%. Ontario's is falling. In the United States, it's 94% and growing. In the United Kingdom, it's 104% and growing. In Germany, 86%. In Italy, 123%. In France, 102%. In Japan, 261%. In Brazil, 55%. In Ireland, 145%. In Mexico, 38%. And in those jurisdictions, Speaker, that net debt to GDP ratio is on its way up and has been for years, where in Ontario it's on its way down and has been for years. These parts of the world that have embraced the PC party's austerity nonsense have seen their net debt to GDP ratios growing, even as the quality of their infrastructure degrades steadily. Ontario borrowed wisely. Ontario invested strategically. Ontario emerged from the recession stronger and is today the largest economy in the Great Lakes Basin, which is North America's economic engine. Speaker, to put this in another way, Ontario in general and my home city of Mississauga in particular came out of that recession stronger than we were when we went in, and by comparison with the United States, came out 3 full years ahead of them. Ontario's unemployment rate has dropped to 6.4% and has been below the national average for 18 straight months, its lowest level in 8 years. Ontario has seen the creation of a renewable energy industry employing more than 30,000 people in high-skill, high-wage careers. Advanced manufacturing and aerospace are both strong in my riding in the neighbourhood of Meadowvale. Ontario's financial sector supplies growth capital to our industries, and it drives employment as well. Infrastructure renewal has fostered careers among skilled trades and professionals alike. Nearly 700,000 new jobs have been created in Ontario since the recession, all a result of intelligently, prudently, and sustainably being able to borrow money and to carry that debt. Some 247,000 jobs just since 2013, and last fall, 25,000 jobs alone in October, and overwhelmingly these jobs are full-time, high-skill and high-wage positions in growth industries like advanced manufacturing, renewable energy, professional services, and similar careers. Ontario posted higher real GDP growth in the first half of this year than did Canada overall, the United States, and almost all of the G7 countries. Ontario, in contrast to what it was under the PC party, Ontario is now dealing from a position of strength, attracting more direct foreign investment year after year than any other North American state or province, including California, which is triple Ontario's population. Speaker, that has meant that Ontario's gross domestic product, as the Minister of Finance has pointed out, has grown to some $800 billion today. It's meant that by growing the size of the Ontario economy, the money that Ontario intelligently borrowed to build Ontario up during the recession, plus Ontario's accumulated debt, is actually a lower portion of our GDP today than our net debt was in 2002. In short, we can easily afford to carry the province's mortgage. The province of Ontario is stronger by far in 2017 relative to its neighbours than it was in centennial year of 1967, 50 years ago. Ontarians have built on a peaceful path to independence, galvanized as a people in times of conflict and depression, and grown together as a robust domestic market and a world-beating exporter. And that's why, Speaker, Ontario looks to the next half-century with confidence and optimism. Speaker, this is the reason why the PC party's truly ridiculous motion must go down to defeat, and Speaker, why the Ontario PC party can never, ever be trusted to manage money. Thank you.